available scales. We discussed scaling, and I mentioned to you the levels of scales, nominal, ordinal, interval, ratio. But also I thought if I just go a step further and show you the different kinds of scales that you can use in your questioning, okay? Some of them which are, the first one which I've used extensively today, the Likert scale, which is a 1 to 5 point scale ranging from strongly disagree, disagree, neither agree nor disagree, agree, strongly agree. That is your interval scale. That interval scale is going to allow you deeper analysis, okay? Because it's an interval scale, it allows you a higher level analysis. Then of course, the semantic differential scale. Your semantic differential scale works on a 7-point scale. So similar to the Likert scale, but going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and giving you bipolar opposites. So for example, if you want to describe your boss, for example, as being pleasant, pleasant, because we like the positive to be heavily worded, unpleasant, okay? Tense, relaxed, and I'm tense, relaxed, okay? Again, using the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And the next one, boring, interesting, which I'm going to put interesting, boring, just to prove a point. Now, these are bipolar. These are opposites that you might want to test. For example, if you want to get a profile of 2 different leaders and you wanted profiles of different things that matter in the organization, and you using the 1 to 7 point scale. So if we go, my boss is pleasant, unpleasant, and I go pleasant, then I'm saying 7, right? But remember we said when we have a negative, it should generally have a smaller score value. So the negative should really be 1 and a positive should really be the 7. However, the one thing you don't want to do is confuse your subjects. You don't want to now turn a scale here and let your subject see 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ideally, you'll want to bring that variable this side. But under no circumstances would you want to have 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So a subject sees some 1 to 7, some 7 to 1, some 1 to 7, 7 to 1. That's confusing. It comes back to what I told you earlier. If you've got a negative, you've got to turn the scale. Okay? Do not turn the scale and confuse your subject. Leave your scale constant, 1 to 7. Ideally, turn your variable. Okay? But if you have to put in mixed, negatively, positively, when you've got mixed scales, that's fine. But you will turn the scale at the point of capturing. I won't go any deeper into it because I explained this earlier. Then forced ranking is the ranking scale we did where we had 4 different characteristics and you were forced to say which was more important, where the feedback was more important than variety, which was more important than significance. Okay? Your dichotomous scale is your yes-no scale. Very simple, which says yes, no, provides you the 2 categories and pre-codes it 1 and 2. Remember, because it is dichotomous, it is automatically nominal, it has categories, it allows you a basic level of analysis only. Okay? Your numerical scale, which goes from extremely displeased to extremely pleased, a similar kind like your semantic differential scale. It is from, of course, your negative is going to be 1, extremely displeased, to 7, extremely pleased, right? It might ask you aspects in your job to indicate how happy you are with it or not. Then your itemized rating scale. Remember, there's often a confusion between the Likert scale and the itemized rating scale. And I've noticed a lot of people use it interchangeably, which is not correct. itemized rating scale, which is also 1 to 5. There's a distinguishing feature between both. When you have a Likert scale, it is only defined in terms of strongly disagree, disagree, neither agree nor disagree, agree, strongly agree. As soon as you change that to anything else, it becomes an itemized rating scale. Suppose you say extremely important, important, neither important, no, not important, extremely unimportant, and so forth. In other words, you're changing the wording. As soon as you change from strongly disagree to strongly agree to anything else, extremely unimportant, unimportant, neither important nor important, important, extremely important, as soon as you change the wording, it's no longer a Likert scale. So don't think that you're using 1 to 5, it has to be a Likert scale. Then when you change the wording, it becomes an itemized rating scale. But it's still on a 1 to 5 point scale, so it still allows you an interval scale, it still allows you a higher level of analysis. Okay? The only difference is the wording has changed, so it's no longer Likert. Likert is only defined in terms of strongly disagree to strongly agree. Then the fixed constant sum scale, which always adds to 100%. How much of your literature is taken from journals, textbooks, other periodicals? So you'll say 60% textbooks, 30% journals, 10% periodicals. It must add up to 100%. Okay? How much of your job on a daily basis is administrative, research, lecturing? Okay? So you're giving percentages. Percentages in a fixed constant sum, it all adds up to 100%. Okay? Then the staple scale. The staple scale is an interesting one, and those of you who are here from marketing, utilized a lot in marketing. This is the kind of scale that has a bottom and a top, with every variable being measured having a +3, +2, +1, and then whatever you're measuring on it. Suppose you're looking at motor vehicles, and you look at resale value, for example. I'm just creating this as I'm going along. So a -1, -2, -3. And you got a particular motor vehicle that you are evaluating. You've just purchased it, and Toyota wants you to give feedback on a +1, +3, -1, -3 scale. And you need to say now, what do you believe about Toyota's resale value? Okay? And suppose I go and I say +3. Okay? A comparative study is compared to something else. Another vehicle being compared against that Toyota. Suppose, for example, it came -2. The idea of this is that if you've got a whole lot of variables, looking at resale value, looking at durability, looking at, what else do you look at? Speed, whatever you're evaluating, the idea is to be able to plot it. Here's your Toyota, and here's your comparative. Okay? Now that's going to come out from your results. I'm just showing you what it's showing. It's showing a trend. It's allowing you to compare two different jobs, makeup vehicles, products, but marketers use it a lot. Do you get the idea of the staple scale? It's a staple. When you staple something, then the middle point of the staple is there, and then you have an equidistance of that staple till you come to the ends of the prong of any staple when you staple. Okay? The paired comparison scale is when you have to choose between two options. You are forced here as well, right? For example, you have to look at spreadability, and a marketer tells you Rama and what else do you? Okay. It's funny when you want it, you don't get it. You can't get it. Okay. Now we're looking at spreadability. What do you believe has greater spreadability? Okay. Well, you are forced to choose between a pair of whatever. All right. Comparative scale. This is where you Magnolia brands to brands. Inferior to about the same to superior. Okay? Now here you're looking at a 3-point on the scale. Then the last one you've seen, if you go to KFC, you've seen it there. To what extent you are happy, or to what extent you refer them to somebody else, very unlikely to very likely. That's your graphic rating scale. Now all of these scales fit into the levels of scales. And then you will be able to tell from that the level of analysis you would engage in. The one thing I want to emphasize, do not have too many scales in your questionnaire. Remember, your respondent has to work through this. The more scales you have, the more instructions you're going to have, the more confused your subject is going to get, the more frustrated they're going to get, the less the response rate. Okay? There's no need, it doesn't impress the examiner or anybody to have a multitude of scales. And the more scales you have, the more difficult your analysis becomes, because one is on a 5-point, one is on a 7-point. You're comparing a 7-point mean to the 5-point mean, the confusion starts. Okay? Keep your questionnaire as simple as possible. Use a scale, justify why you think that's the best scale to use, and at the most 1 or 2 scales, not all over the shop. It's going to create a nightmare for you when it comes to capturing your data, and a bigger nightmare when it comes to your analysis. So that rounds off the different types of scales that are available in closed-ended questionnaires, in other words, in quantitative analysis.
Could you comment on, sometimes there are 5 options and sometimes there are 7, so that difference, and then also the fence sitting option of choosing the right middle. So some say you should have something with even number of options, so they have to choose.
You see, what Sue is referring to is when you have a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-point scale, you've got the fence sitting in the middle. That if I can't say whether I disagree or agree, let me take the easy way out. Let me say neither agree nor disagree. And if you have too much of fence sitting, how do you do your analysis? And then there's the other school of thought is, hey, let's get out of that. Let's force a response. Let's leave out that middle and force the person to either disagree or agree. Now yes, that will solve your problem of fence sitting. But let's ask ourselves one thing, and perhaps now I'm bringing in my perception. Isn't that fence sitting valuable? Isn't that telling you something about the employees in that organization? If, for example, you're asking them about communication and they really don't know which way to go, that simply tells you they do not want to commit because they don't know. And if they don't know, it's a bunch of employees in the dark. It's telling you something. A bunch of indecisive employees tells you a lot about they're not used to making decisions, they don't engage in decisions, that kind of extra element that you may want to tap about when looking at the culture of a place. Okay? So it depends on the study. You can take a forced compliance and drop off the middle, but I believe that that 3, that fence sitter, is telling us something as well. Okay? Now coming to why a 5-point as opposed to a 7-point. You see, it doesn't really matter whether you go 5 or 7, it depends on the scale you've chosen. Both have the fence sitting, both have the middle, and both allow you to choose the middle ground if you can't make a decision. However, I often find that this allows more stringent thinking, and sometimes it depends on the intellect of your subjects as well. You don't want to confuse them with a very long scale, where the indecisiveness can come in between a 4 or a 5 or a 5 and a 6. Oh, where does it sit? Throw this question in. All right, because it's allowing more thinking, it's allowing for a more thought-provoking answer. But the question is your subject of that caliber to make them sit down and think between very small differences on a scale, right? So that's for you to decide whether this one suits you better than the 1 to 5. I find you get more or less the same answer on a 1 to 5 or 1 to 7 point scale anyway. Alright? Your analysis becomes more in-depth in your 7-point scale, in that you're starting to look at little differences and you've got to ask yourself, do those little differences matter? Alright. So having done the scales then, the last part of the aspect of measurement is validity and reliability. And this is very important because all this questionnaire design you're going into will be totally wasted if your questionnaire is not valid. The most important aspect to cover there is what comes first. What do you confirm first in a questionnaire? Validity clearly comes first. You want to first ensure that you've got a valid questionnaire, that it measures what it's supposed to measure before you see that it measures it consistently. Let me give you an example. Here's our study on the board with our focus being job satisfaction. We got a questionnaire. It's very high in reliability, 0.999. Very high in reliability. Absolutely reliable questionnaire. And I'm giving it all over. So I've established reliability, it's high. But when we analyze it, there's nothing about it that's measuring job satisfaction. So I've given out an absolutely reliable questionnaire. It's reliable, but it's measuring employee morale. So I didn't establish validity. I didn't know that it was the right questionnaire, but I just know it's very reliable. It's reliable in measuring the wrong thing. So therefore, we always establish validity first. We make sure that our questionnaire is in fact measuring job satisfaction accurately. Then we test how reliably will it do it. Okay? So always establish validity first to make sure that it is measuring what it's supposed to measure. Then when it's measuring what it's supposed to measure, make sure that it's measuring it consistently, reliably. So validity always comes first. In statistical analysis, we look at validity in terms of factor analysis. In other words, you can statistically measure the validity of your items in your questionnaire using factor analysis. You would do it first after your pilot study. So when you get the questionnaires back, you can test its validity. Once it's confirmed, then you know you're good to run with your final study. What does validity say? We in our spreadsheet claims that question 1, 4, 7, 10 and 13 validly measure pay. Remember all the greens, the light greens were our pay, right? We said that those 5 items, 1, 4, 7, 10, 13, validly measure the influence of pay on job satisfaction. Now it's time to test that. In our eyes, at face value, it is valid. But does the interpretation of it from our subject see it as being valid? What we'd like to see in a factor analysis is that when we do a factor analysis, those items 1, 4, 7, 10 and 13 actually have high factor loadings for pay, right? If you find everything is high, but question 13 is 0.129, a low value, then it means there's something wrong in question 13 we need to look at again. There's something ambiguous in it. There's something confusing in it. There's something that's taking it out of pay, maybe into one of the other domains, maybe into working conditions. Let's rephrase question 13 so that it also has a high loading with the pay variable. What you would like to see is a factor that comes out neat. Factor 1, 4, 7, 10 and 13 have fairly high loadings. Now it doesn't have to all come out 0.9999, okay? We consider fair loadings from 0.5 onwards, and you can quote Abby and Potas on measuring that, okay? So 0.5 onwards will tell you a factor loading, an item loading, whether it loads significantly into a factor, okay? What you wouldn't want to see is that you said the item is 1, 4, 7, 10 and 13, and one of these items don't fall into that grouping at all. Okay? So at your pilot study phase, if you've done the validity, you know, let's rephrase this item. Or the pilot study phase, you know, let's not rephrase it, let's replace it. Okay? Question at the back?
Oh yeah, how did you find out, to run fact analysis, is there a limited number of cases for it to actually yield a result, like say from 200 or something?
No, it isn't a limited number of cases, but statistical packages can only take, certain statistical packages can only take from a certain number of sample and above. For example, if you've got a sample of, I think 700, your SPSS is not going to be able to do the factor analysis on that, but another program would. So different statistical packages will only carry a certain sample size for factor analysis. Now, I'm not into statistical packages, so I can't tell you which packages in particular are going to carry which size sample, but I know that SPSS has a limitation in terms of how it can do its factor analysis for very big samples. Okay? In which case, you can use one of the other statistical software. Yeah, that's the only limitation. Otherwise, it can be done on any study with any sample size. So your factor analysis is saying that if those items don't load together, there's a problem. The question is, items are not worded appropriately. It's signaling to you, alarm bells, change something before you run your full study.
I think the question was the other side of the scale. What kind of minimum sample size for your pilot study would be helpful in terms of...
Oh, you mean for the pilot study? Well, you know what, if you have a very low sample size, that's certainly going to affect your reliability. Because your reliability is going to, if you have a very small pilot, it's going to affect your reliability. But it's not going to affect your validity so much. Okay, you're still going to have a good sense of your validity. But a small pilot is going to give you a lower validity, but it's a baseline. Because if you got that validity, a lower reliability, if you got that reliability on your pilot, it means that on your full run it's going to be higher. Okay? It still gives you a sense of whether it's reliable enough.
Would you recommend a
It
number
won't
for pilot
affect
study?
your validity. Sorry?
Would you recommend a number for pilot study?
How many researchers?
Oh, it depends on how big your sample is. I can't tell you 20 because your sample might only be 20. Well, it wouldn't be good for a statistical analysis. You shouldn't go with sample sizes less than 80. Okay? We're going to find that if you have sample sizes too small with quantitative analysis, you're going to get a lot of non-significant results, which you can't report because the cells are going to be less than 5. And once your cells are less than 5, your results are not going to be significant. So if you're going quantitative, try and have a sample not less than 80 to get proper results. And then I would say a good pilot would be about 20. Okay? Of course, that would increase as your population of your sample size increases. Question?
Should we do analysis specific for pilot study as a complete full part of the analysis, or should the analysis just work only for validity and reliability from the pilot?
No, just your validity and reliability. You don't want to replicate things which become confusing in the end. It's nice to just test your reliability and your validity of your instrument. That being said, if your instrument is problematic and has to be redone in any way, those people you used in your pilot can't go into the full study. But if you find that your questionnaire was fine, perfect, those 20 odd can become part of your full study in the end. Question in the front? Oh, that answers your question. All right. So factor analysis then means that those particular items which you've now put together or categorized together, clustered together, should in fact have good item loadings greater than 0.5. And if it's less, then it means the questionnaire needs to be redesigned, changed, rephrased, adjusted a bit. Then coming back to this, in terms of reliability. In terms of reliability, the ideal inter-item consistency test would be Cronbach's coefficient alpha. You could use what is also called Kuder-Richardson 20, but that has a sample limitation. So your inter-item consistency using the Cronbach's coefficient alpha might be your ideal. Okay? Now, how is this interpreted? It's interpreted against -1 to +1. The closer it is to 1, whether it's negative or positive, the more reliable your result is. So things like 0.312, for example, is a low, very low level of reliability. You're likely to get this if you did a very small pilot. That's understandable. Okay? Your 0.5 is a moderate reliability. What's considered good to go with is 0.65 onwards. Now, what happens if one of your items in that entire profile comes out with a lower reliability? It doesn't mean you got to now redo your questionnaire. Okay? If all your items came out relatively high and one item came out on the lower side, 0.5, go ahead with your study, report that one as your limitation. Okay? There's no, otherwise you'll be hashing and rehashing questionnaires for years to come and you won't progress with your study. Okay? As long as other items and other variables are fairly high, if one comes out a little low, report it in your limitations of your study. It's no big deal. Alright. The last parts of the three major aspects of questionnaire design, the appearance of your questionnaire, easy to understand. It's your first impression to your subject. Remember, you're not necessarily there with the subject when they fill in the questionnaire. Don't have a questionnaire that is so tight squeezed, doesn't have place to fill in anything, or a questionnaire that runs into pages where the questions are so badly arranged. Make sure that the appearance of your questionnaire is good, right? It's good to look at, it's good to fill, it's got a good flow, there's clear instructions. Those are important aspects. Don't have long questionnaires. Have a good introduction. It's your first opportunity to establish rapport with your subject. Tell them why it will benefit to have them fill in the questionnaire. Assure them confidentiality. Assure them anonymity. Inform them that they have the decision whether to participate or not. It's voluntary.